Good evening. It is time for us to go ahead and jump back into our brief study of the prophets this evening. As you can probably tell by looking at our overhead, we are going to begin looking at Jeremiah. I say begin. We're not going to spend more than 1 week looking at Jeremiah. Obviously, that means that we're not going to cover Jeremiah adequately, the same way we didn't cover Isaiah adequately. We're just kind of giving a brief look and a little bit of an introduction so that you will at least have something for future follow-up study. It will be impossible to do it complete justice. This might be surprising. Jeremiah actually is the longest book in the Bible, and therefore it is hard to try to adequately cover all of that in one evening. Most people think of the Psalms as the longest book of the Bible. It's pretty close. The Psalms definitely has, if you break it down into chapters, it has 150 Psalms, so obviously a lot more of those. But Jeremiah does have more words in it. Jeremiah penned more words than anybody else in the Bible. You've got Moses, I guess, in the very beginning had those 5 books. But as far as just a single book goes. So as we look at Jeremiah, I want to begin kind of where we, I think, began with Isaiah, if I'm remembering correctly, and I may not be. But that is to look at his call. So let's go to the very beginning. Now, if you remember in Isaiah, it was a little bit different in that the first few chapters of Isaiah were prophetic right from the very beginning. It wasn't until we got to chapter 6 that we saw Isaiah's call. And if you remember, what were some interesting things about Isaiah's calling in Isaiah chapter 6. Anybody remember anything? You guys are like, you told me to go to Jeremiah 1, not Isaiah 6. Quit asking me about a passage you didn't ask me to turn to, right? Anybody remember anything that sticks out to you from the calling of Isaiah? Remember, he was there and he said, I can't speak. Why? I'm a man of unclean lips. And so what then? A hot coal was brought to touch the lips so that he could then, to purify them, so that he could then use them. And this is it's kind of a thing that you see with the calling of the various prophets when they have some kind of call that's given to them, the exception of Jonah, but of the major prophets, with the minor prophets you don't really see this. But notice when you get in Jeremiah chapter 1, and I'm just going to start, we're going to talk about 1 through 3 in just a moment, but I want to start in verse 4. The word of the Lord came to me. I chose you. Before I formed you in the womb, I set you apart. Before you were born, I appointed you a prophet to the nations. But I protested, oh no, Lord God, look, I don't know how to speak, since I am only a youth. And the Lord said to me, do not say I am only a youth, for you will go to everyone I send you to and speak whatever I tell you. Do not be afraid of anyone. I will be with you to rescue you. This is the Lord's declaration. Then the Lord reached out his hand, touched my mouth, and told me, I have now filled your mouth with my words. See, I have appointed you today over the nations and kingdoms to uproot, to tear down, to destroy and demolish, to build and plant. So do you see any similarities between Isaiah and Jeremiah here as far as their call is concerned? Yeah, Jan says, you have this with the mouth. Did I hear you say Moses as well? Yeah, there's some similarity. We're going to talk about the Moses connection in just a second. I'm going to go to the first one that you brought up. That is the idea of the mouth itself. In both instances, there's a supernatural touching of the mouth, which then prepares that mouth for God's prophetic word to come from it. And so, remember, yes, they're writing prophets, but what's written down is what they have spoken. So, the touching of the mouth, the cleansing, the purifying, that is the preparation of the mouth for God's prophetic utterance takes place. In both the instances, and Jan brings up Moses as well, because I think he fits into this, I guess you could say, trope as well. What other connection do you have between them? Before they're cleansed, they say what? They say, I can't do it. Right? I can't. I'm a man of unclean lips. Jeremiah, I can't. I am but a youth. Go back to Moses. Did Moses say, I can't? Times, right? Until finally he said, I won't. But that's a discussion for Moses' calling. And we'll, I'm sure, talk about that at some point. But you have these connections where the objection comes up and God takes away the objection. And here, with these prophets very specifically, they are given God-ordained roles. This isn't, again, just something for anybody and everybody. They are specifically endowed with what they need to fulfill the mission that God is calling them to fulfill. All right, so let's go back up then to verses 1 through 3. The words of Jeremiah, the son of Hilkiah, one of the priests living in Anathoth in the territory of Benjamin. The word of the Lord came to him the 13th year of the reign of Josiah, son of Amon, king of Judah. It also came throughout the days of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, until the 5th month of the 11th year of Zedekiah, son of Josiah, king of Judah, when the people of Jerusalem went into exile. All right, so tell me a little something about Jeremiah's reign. What kings are listed here? You can just belt them out. What kings? Okay, it starts with Josiah. And Josiah, his reign begins around 640, so sometime in there. People think we're probably, just based on Jeremiah, we're probably getting close towards the ending or midway point of Josiah's reign. But who reigned after Josiah? Which one of Josiah's sons took the throne upon his death in 609? Anybody remember? What's that? Zedekiah, is that what you said? Okay. All right. It's a good guess. No, but it's a good guess. What's that? Okay, Jehoiakim really is the one who is going to reign. There's someone between them, though. By the way, let me know if the screen does the flickering thing that it was doing this morning during class. Has it been doing that at all? Okay. All right, because something keeps catching my eye, and I turn around, I'm like, no, it's not doing it. I keep thinking that it's doing it. I have a spare cable to swap out if that's a problem so that we can, try to see if that's the issue. All right, so Kathy, were you going to say someone? No? it was Kim before Ken. Yeah, Dave, what were you going to say? Okay, well, Manasseh was well before Josiah. So Manasseh, Amon, Josiah. Jehoiahaz is the son of Josiah, and he hardly reigns at all for just a very, very little bit of time, because Egypt just took over Judah, and they just killed Josiah, and Jehoiahaz is on the throne basically long enough to be taken by Egypt and taken down into Egypt, and then they put Jehoiakim on the throne there in 609. So he reigns until 597, and in 597 is when you have kind of a, you could say, a revolt to some degree. They fail to pay their taxes the way they are supposed to, their tribute to Nebuchadnezzar, at which point he comes in 597. This is where he takes, he fails to pay the taxes so that Nebuchadnezzar comes out, right? And then Jehoiakim dies before Nebuchadnezzar arrives. And then, who sits on the throne for like 2 months or something like that? Kathy, what name? Or maybe it was Eileen? I don't know. No, Jehoiakim, right? C-H-I-N. So Jehoiakim then takes the throne in 597, just long enough for Nebuchadnezzar to arrive and him say, the city's yours. Sorry, my dad did it. It's not my fault. And then he's taken to Babylon. And this is when, Serena, Zedekiah is placed on the throne. What's the problem with Zedekiah? By the way, here's all those dates. What's wrong with Zedekiah? Who is he? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. He is another son of Josiah. He is not in the direct line from Jehoiahaz, Jehoiakim, all of that. We're now putting an uncle, basically, onto the throne, and he is not the rightful heir in the moment. So this is, by the way, the political turmoil that's going on as Jeremiah is doing his work. And he's going to be there through all of this. Where is Jeremiah through all of this? Where does he do his work? All right, he's in Jerusalem and in Judah until you get towards the end of his life, and we'll talk about that probably in just a little bit. So he's part of the family of priests in Anathoth, or Anathoth. You could, from what I've read, potentially trace his lineage all the way back to Eli. Perhaps. There's, at least good, you could say good reason to do so. However, we do very specifically know why it is that his family of priests is in Anathoth. And this goes back to 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 26 and 27. What's going on in 1 Kings chapter 2? Remember, this is what happens at the end of the Samuels? The Samuel scroll? That's when what happens? Or basically it's the end of whose life? David. So, David, he's still kind of alive, but when you get into the king's account, this is the transition from David to whom? Solomon. So, what's going on in the beginning, in that transition? Was it a nice, smooth transition? It was not a nice, smooth transition. So, when Adonijah made a claim to the throne, he did so with Joab and with Abiathar the priest, and tried to have himself crowned the king, even though that wasn't what David himself had specifically suggested would happen. So, make all of this short, when Solomon gets onto the throne, he is now issuing payback for the people who led the rebellion against him. And he said to Abiathar that he was instrumental for David, his father, so he wasn't going to execute him, but he was going to exile them. And this is the family Jeremiah comes from, which goes all the way back to this rebellion that took place when the one who was not ordained by God sat on the throne. And maybe this explains why a lot of the critique of the priesthood, he himself being a part of that. He was a priest. He's a prophet who was a priest. He is very young, apparently, when he becomes a prophet, and when he is called, which is seen in his saying, I can't do this, I'm but a youth. All right, moving on. We're running out of time, actually, quickly. This is interesting. All right, he was not a popular prophet in his day. He endured all kinds of persecution. And where does he end up? Anybody know where he ends up at the end of his life, where he is? Yeah, he's in Egypt at the end of his life. So he goes through all kinds of persecution. I don't know if we're going to have time to look at a passage when the siege comes up against Zedekiah. He's actually imprisoned, and he's imprisoned because he kept saying to Zedekiah, the word of the Lord is saying that we're going to go into Babylon, and that the king of Babylon is God's going to hand over Israel to Babylon. And the king didn't like that, and imprisoned him because of it. After everything's done, he is kidnapped by a group of people, and he is taken to Egypt against his will, because he says, we should stay here. And they said, but no, you're coming with us, and we're going down there instead. All right, so I wanted to produce a nice outline for you that will follow the flow of Jeremiah's thought, from the very beginning, and kind of you can kind of see how the thought process goes through, and the flow of this whole book comes together. And unfortunately, you just can't do that because it's not there. There is no real good structure to Jeremiah. You can pick up outlines, and they'll tell you all the things that happen in Jeremiah, but you're not going to be able to weave a thread through all of those and say, I can follow this flow of logic. It's not like reading Romans, where you have an argument that is fully presented, or Jonah, where you have a narrative that follows in a chronological fashion. It just does not have that kind of shape to it. So, at least we can narrow down all of Jeremiah and say, this is at least the main message that we receive from Jeremiah. Except you can't. There's not just a single, this is the one main message that we're supposed to get. It's kind of all over the place. And it's not a bad thing. Don't hear me critiquing Jeremiah and saying, boy, you should have written this a whole lot better. It is what it's supposed to be. However, there are plenty of themes that we can pull from this, and I think that we are supposed to pull from this. First of all, and we're going to open up and actually start looking at some of the text here. If you want to turn to chapter 7. In Jeremiah chapter 7, I'm going to start verse 3. You see some problems that are taking place as far as the religious leaders are concerned. And this is part of a larger section, obviously, but I want to narrow it down. I wanted to narrow it down to these verses. Starting in verse 3, this is what the Lord of armies, the God of Israel, says, correct your ways and your actions. I will allow you to live in this place. Do not trust deceitful words chanting, this is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. Instead, if you really correct your ways and your actions, if you act justly toward one another, if you no longer oppress the resident alien, the fatherless, the widow, and no longer shed innocent blood in this place, or follow other gods, bringing harm on yourselves, I will allow you to live in this place, the land I gave to your ancestors long ago and forever. But look, you keep trusting in deceitful words that cannot help. Do you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, burn incense to Baal, and follow other gods that you have not known? Then do you come and stand before me in this house that bears my name and say, we are rescued, so we can continue to do all these detestable acts? Has this house which bears my name become a den of robbers in your view? Yes, I too have seen it. This is the Lord's declaration. All right, so what is going on? What is the religious, I guess you could say, environment during this time? What's that? During Jeremiah's day. Okay. You say global warming. I have no idea what your connection is. Help me. Okay. You'll have to explain it to me later. What's going on contextually with the religious setup taking place? What are they doing right now? Yeah, Mike? Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Mike said that in this state, the people are putting their hope and their trust in the fact that they have the Lord's temple within their midst, and they are confident that no matter what else, they at least know God is not going to allow his temple to be taken. And so we have the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, and we know with absolute certainty that God will not see his temple destroyed. Were they right? They were not. And God says, look, don't put your faith in the fact that the temple of the Lord is in your midst when you are acting with all of these atrocities, and then you try to go to my house and then live and say, well, we are following God. He goes, that doesn't work. That doesn't fit. And so this is actually a theme that you're going to see in Ezekiel as well, as far as the temple is concerned and the wickedness and the fact that God will leave that temple. He moved in, he can move out just as easily. And that's what it is that he does. So they're putting a lot of faith, a lot of hope, and a lot of faith in the temple of the Lord. That's why you see verse 12, he says, look, go to my place, or return back to my place that was at Shiloh, where I made my name dwell at first. What does Shiloh look like now? Was it preserved and saved because it once was the house of God? No. And he says, neither will this be the same. All right. So we see here, he talked about the immorality that is taking place right here. Verse 9, do you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, and burn incense to Baal and follow other gods? By the way, those come straight from where? These are out of the 10 Commandments right here. This is God's top 10, and he's saying, by the way, I'm going to check off every single one of these things. That's what you're doing. The immorality, just blatant immorality, is there in place. Another key theme is political abuse that is taking place amongst those who are in power, especially from the kings. There's a decent amount of the mistreatment that Jeremiah receives from the hands of Zedekiah in particular. And then there's just some places where it seems as if Zedekiah likes Jeremiah too. And so it's a really interesting dynamic between them. But you see political power being abused is also something else going on. Another theme, key theme from Jeremiah, you can see God's sovereignty at work. That is the way that God is in control. And he makes it very clear he's in control. These are the decisions that he is making. When Nebuchadnezzar comes against Judah, is it because Babylon is just that much stronger of a nation? Question becomes, why is Babylon that much stronger of a nation at this point in time? This is God's work, his directing of the nations at this point and at this time to fulfill and accomplish his will in history. And then you have also the idea of God's people in exile. I can't remember right off the top of my head. I don't think that I have chapter 29 again later, but Jeremiah chapter 29, if you look over there, I know we'll be looking at chapter 28, but chapter 29, to whom is this written? Okay, to the captives. What were you going to say, Bruce? Okay. Okay, but the Israelites where? And the captives of where? Well, these are the ones in Babylon. He is writing, Jeremiah chapter 29 is a letter that is written to the exiles who are living in Babylon, which is where, by the way, who's over in that area with them? Ezekiel's over there. So he's encroaching on Ezekiel's territory here. He writes this letter, chapter 29, to them as a way of saying, hey, hunker down, get used to it. We're going to talk about chapters 27 and 28 in a little bit, and his confrontation with Hananiah, and whether or not it was going to be short or long. And he's saying it's going to be a long time. He tells them, just hunker down, make yourselves comfortable, build your houses and such. You're going to be here for the long haul. Do good to the nation that has you exiled here. Work for their prosperity. And just understand this is where you have the taken out of context verse there in 11. I know the plans I have for you. This is the Lord's declaration. Plans for your well-being, not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope. This is written very specifically to those Jews in exile. This is not a general statement to every person who has ever lived and ever will live. It's not written for us on an individual level. If I'd remembered, I would have found there's this great little cartoon of Jeremiah who talks about all the great things that he's doing in this book, but his end legacy for which he will forever be known is greeting cards or graduation cards. That's what it is, graduation cards. All the graduation cards that have Jeremiah 29, verse 11 on them. That's his long-lasting legacy, right? No, it's not written to us, and God saying, I've got a plan for you individually in your life that I have for you. Yeah, that's just not what he's accomplishing. He's talking to the people as a whole, saying, settle in, but just know there will come a time I will bring you back. So that's what's taking place there. By the way, you've probably heard me. I love that the CSB, Christian Standard Bible, does this. I don't think that the ESV does. And yeah, how many times have you heard me say, this is the Lord's declaration? And that sounds weird. Does that sound weird? Because you have declares the Lord, probably. I'm assuming in those places. Yeah. It's actually a noun there. It's not a verb. It is a noun. The CSB does this right. It's actually the first translation I've seen that does this right. So that's really cool that it does. It treats it like a noun. This is the declaration of the Lord. All right. One more thing. The object, another key theme is the object of grace. This is, I think, the only place in the Old Testament that refers to the new covenant. In Jeremiah chapter 31 and verse 31, he says, I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Jacob, with the house of Israel, the house of Judah, not like the covenant I made with them, which they broke, made with their fathers, which they broke, even though I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. But Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 34, remember we talked about this as one of the key passages of the Old Testament, a promise of the new covenant to come. And that is a statement of grace. All right. Now, one of the things that Jeremiah and Ezekiel are both well known for are, you might call them object lessons, or acted lessons, or acted sermons, is a phrase that I've read and I've used here. And there are a number of these in which God says, hey, I want to make a point, so why don't you go and do this? And then after you've done this, then let the people know this represents what I am going to do. And so there are a number of these that you find throughout, like in chapter 13. You have the lesson of the linen waistcloth, or CSB comes through again. I really like how they translate this, the linen underwear, which is kind of basically what it is. He says, hey, get yourself some new underwear, wear it, and then take it off and go to the Euphrates and stick it in a little rock crevice area and leave it there. And Jeremiah's like, okay, well, I guess that's what I'm doing. Because he just leaves it there, and he has no idea why in the world he did that until sometime later God then says, oh, hey, by the way, remember that underwear that you left up there? Yeah, go get it. And he goes and he digs it up where it was left, and he's like, well, this is useless. This is worthless. This was brand new when I put it in there, but I can't wear this anymore. I can't use this. It's dirty. It's ruined. And God says, yeah, that's Israel. That's what Israel has become. And, that's what is taking place. So it's those kinds of pictures. You have also, in chapter 18, he goes, hey, I want you to go down to the potter's house. Jeremiah's like, okay, I'm here. God's like, hey, you see what that potter's doing? He fashioned a jar And he just didn't like the way it was turning out. So what did he do? Yeah, he started over. He took the mold, took all the clay, and then remolded it into another jar. And the second one, he's like, yeah, this is what I like. And God says, does not the potter have the right to do with the clay whatever he wants to do? I can do this with Israel. I can take Israel and take what's there and remold it and start all over again. And this is what I will do, right? God can do that with them. In chapter 19, you have the teaching of the broken jar. He tells them, buy a brand new jar and then take the elders out to Hinnom Valley, and in the Hinnom Valley, shatter the jar. He's got all the elders of Israel standing there. He shatters the jar, and then he starts to say, you see all that? That's what God's going to do to you. God's going to make this place a wasteland, and just as that was shattered, so shall Israel be shattered. Judgment is coming. And so he uses these very vivid visual representations. Now, I said we were going to go and look at it. If you're still there, I want to look at chapters 27 and 28. This is, if it's not, it should be one of the more famous parts of Jeremiah, in which these object lessons become really powerful. And this is the lessons concerning the yoke. So, chapter 27, at the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, this word came to Jeremiah from the Lord. This is what the Lord said to me. Make chains and yoke bars for yourself and put them on your neck. Send word to the king of Edom, the king of Moab, the king of the Ammonites, the king of Tyre, the king of Sidon, through messengers who are coming to King Zedekiah of Judah in Jerusalem. Command them to go to their masters, saying, this is what the Lord of armies, the God of Israel, says. Tell this to your masters. By my great strength and outstretched arm, I made the earth, the people, and animals on the face of the earth. I give it to anyone I please. So now I have placed all these lands under the authority of my servant, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. I have even given him the wild animals to serve him. All nations will serve him, his son and grandson, until the time for his own land comes. And then many nations and great kings will enslave him. All right. So, just very quickly before we move on, because obviously it keeps going at this point, who is this message for? We just read it. To whom is he sending this? Okay, Jeremiah, but Jeremiah is, okay, first of all, what is Jeremiah doing? He's having to create a what? Someone say yoke? Okay, he's putting a yoke on his shoulders. And are y'all familiar with a yoke? You know, the big wooden bar thing that you put on an animal so that you can attach the animal to a cart so that the animal can pull the cart. He's creating one of these to put on his own shoulders so that he can then walk around and have everybody see him with a yoke on his shoulders. So that's how this begins. Who is he supposed to intercept and talk to? Yeah, whenever messengers from all these kingdoms send somebody to the king, to Zedekiah, he is supposed to intercept them and say, hey, here's a message from Yahweh that you need to take back with you. Now, imagine, if you will, a guy in a yoke who comes up to you as you are bringing a message to the king of Judah and says, hey, just so you know, here's your message. What's the message? You're going to be under Babylon's control. That's what Julia just said. You're going to be under Babylon's control. I've given Nebuchadnezzar everything, even authority over the animals. This is really interesting. If you want, you can get into kind of a tailspin going, making connections back to Genesis 1 and 2, and the Adam piece and the authority that's given, but it's an authority that only lasts so long until pride gets in the way, and then his comeuppance is going to come, right? And when his time comes, then he's going to use someone else to enslave him. You have all of these pieces that are really at play here. But the interesting thing is, God is sending this message to the other nations, and it seems as if we follow Fairbairn, if he's sending the message to them, then what? Remember our discussion? Yeah, it's a conditional statement. They have the opportunity. God is giving them the opportunity by letting them know. Jeremiah is telling them and sending them with the message. They could avoid it. Now, verse 8, as for the nation or kingdom that does not serve King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, does not place its neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon, that nation I will punish by sword, famine, and plague. This is the Lord's declaration, until through him I have destroyed it. So you should not listen to your prophets, diviners, diviners, dreamers, fortune tellers, sorcerers, who say to you, don't serve the king of Babylon. They are prophesying a lie, so that you will be removed from your land. I will banish you, and you will perish. But as for the nation that will put its neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon and serve him, I will leave it in its own land, and that nation will cultivate it and reside in it. This is the Lord's declaration. Now, this message is being sent out to these other nations. Who else is going to receive this message? What's that? No. Yeah, he's going to make sure that it doesn't just go to the surrounding nations around Israel, but to Israel itself, the nation of Judah. So, verse 12, I spoke to King Zedekiah in Judah in the same way. Put your neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon. Serve him and his people and live. Why should you and your people die by the sword or famine or plague, as the Lord has threatened against any nation that refuses to serve the king of Babylon? Do not listen to the words of the prophets telling you, don't serve the king of Babylon, because they are prophesying a lie to you. I have not sent them. This is the Lord's declaration, and they are prophesying falsely in my name. Therefore I will banish you, and you will perish, you and the prophets who are prophesying to you. That should be pretty simply understood. But then we come into chapter 28. In that same year, at the beginning of the reign of King Zedekiah of Judah in the 5th month, in the 4th year, the prophet Hananiah, son of Azur from Gibeon, said to me in the temple of the Lord in the presence of the priests and all the people, this is what the Lord of armies, the God of Israel, says. I have broken the yoke of the king of Babylon. Within 2 years I will restore to this place all the articles of the Lord's temple that King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon took from here, transported to Babylon. And I will restore to this place Jeconiah, son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and all the exiles from Judah who went to Babylon. This is the Lord's declaration. For I will break the yoke of the king of Babylon. All right, so what is Hananiah's message from God? A lie, yes. All right. First and foremost, we see it as that. We've already been told. Yahweh has already said, don't listen to the prophet if he says, resist Babylon, right? And that's exactly what Hananiah is saying. We've already been, some word for word language that's used here. So this is what he says. How long? 2 years. And what's going to return? All right. Very specifically, Jeff said everything they lost, but very specifically, what? Okay. The various things that were taken out of the temple and taken to Babylon, right? They are going to come back. Who's going to come back? Jeconiah, a.k.a. who's Jeconiah is also known as Jehoiakim, C-H-I-N. Jeconiah, Jehoiakim are the same person. So remember, Jehoiakim was taken off into Babylon, and he says, 2 years, he's going to be back, and he's going to be placed back on the throne the way that he should be. And all the exiles are going to return. He says, I will break the yoke of Babylon. And then you see Jeremiah's response. By the way, he talked about all the vessels of gold, the pieces of gold, or the instruments, the things from the temple. Do they come back? When do we see them show up again? Anybody remember? Well, okay, but they have a part to play in the story. Yeah, Kathy? They show up before that. Yeah, Serena? Yeah. Remember, they play a key part in the story with Belshazzar. I think that's his name. Yep. Yeah, so all the way up to the very end, the very last night of Babylon as a nation, the night that they are overthrown, you see these things are still there and they are used, and it seems to be the reason that the hand shows up and starts writing on the wall, right, is because they had taken these sacred items and used them in this way. All right. Quickly, running out of time again. Anyway, I find that very interesting. So, Jeremiah, you can almost see his response here. If you were able to, I'd have Elijah stand up and show you his shirt, which says National Sarcastic Society on it. Jeremiah has a place in the Hall of Fame, I think, for that. Verse 6, the prophet Jeremiah said, Amen. You know what? May the Lord do that. That sounds great, Hananiah. I am all about that right too. May the Lord do that. May the Lord make the words you prophesied come true. May he restore the articles of the Lord's temple and all the exilons from Babylon to this place. Man, that is fantastic, Hananiah. Only here's the problem. This is the message that I'm speaking in your hearing and all the people. The prophets who preceded you from me in ancient times, what did they prophesy? What do the prophets almost always prophesy? War, famine, plague against the lands and great kingdoms. How many times does God send a prophet to the people in order to say, hey, peace. This is peace. I'm going to give you peace. That doesn't happen very often, right? Usually the prophets are sent in such a way, I mean, they're sent to promote peace, but they're sent in such a way that says the trajectory that you're on right now will not lead to peace, right? That's the message that they give. And here Hananiah is saying, no, 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 no. We don't have to do anything. We're on the right trajectory that leads to peace. No problems. 2 years, we'll be back. No big deal. And Jeremiah is like, you realize that that's not the way that God typically works with prophecy, right? Be very careful of a prophet who comes saying peace. That's the message that he gives right here. As for the prophet who prophesies peace, only when the word of the prophet comes true should you recognize him as someone that the Lord has sent. In other words, if you have a doomsday prophet, there's a little more credibility there as opposed to the one who is declaring peace. For the one declaring peace, say, you know what, I'll believe it when I see it. And then when you see it, you say, oh, okay, well, he must have come from the Lord. But that's not typically the way it is. Well, Hananiah, he takes the yoke from Jeremiah's back, and what does he do? He breaks it and says, this is what the Lord says, within 2 years I will break the yoke of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon from the neck of all the nations. And Jeremiah's like, all right, you do that, buddy. Good luck to you. And then God comes back to Jeremiah and tell him, wear a yoke of, but wearing a yoke made out of iron. Now, man, that's got to be one heavy yoke to put on your back and start carrying around like that. He's gone from wood that's breakable to iron, and he's like, thus, this is God's declaration. You broke a wooden yoke in its place. You have now made an iron yoke bar. This verse 16, I'm about to send you off to Hananiah. I'm about to send you off the face of the earth. You will die this year because you preached rebellion against the Lord. All right. So that takes us through that. And then I was hoping that we would have a chance to read through this, but that's okay. Chapter 32, you have, it may be the last of these kind of object lessons, these acted sermon type of things. This is where he puts into action to purchase or to redeem a kinsman's field. We talked about this whole thing when we went through Ruth. Remember that discussion? That if somebody is down and out, they can sell their field off, right? And get a purchase for it. And the first people who have the opportunity to do that would be those who are close family, so that they can, it's a way of helping out a kinsman, and they have the rights to do so. At the same time, is that a forever kind of a purchase? No. Eventually it gets restored, right? I mean, it's kind of the idea, the year of Jubilee, which, by the way, would happen every 50 years or so, right? Every 7 Sabbath years. And Sabbath year is 7, so about every 50 years. Usually about once in a person's lifetime, they would be able to experience a Jubilee. Some people might be able to see a couple of them. Why is this significant that he's telling Jeremiah to go ahead and go through the purchase of a kinsman's field? Jason, is your hand up? No. Oh, okay. What does it look like? Does it look like there's any hope? Nebuchadnezzar coming in, the land being devastated, the temples, destroyed, everything else. Does it look like there's any hope at all? Why would you buy a field? Why would you go through the process of following the law of Moses to go through the redemption of this field? unless there was hope that things were going to be restored again. He buys the Redeemer, or he redeems the kinsman's field because God is not yet done with the people in this land. And there will be a time that things are going to be restored back to rights. There's a reason to do this, because God will bring them back, is the message that I think we're supposed to get from that. All right. I did not have anything prepared for it, but Jeremiah is also known, probably more well known as what? What's he referred to? Jeremiah I think someone said weeping prophet. Yeah, Jeremiah the weeping prophet. And a lot of that comes from the other prophetic book that he writes. What is that? All right, Lamentations. And given the nature, Lamentations is written over the span of some of this, but within it, we're not going to take the time necessarily to look through Lamentations. I'm going to keep on moving with the prophets, but there is some pretty brutal stuff that you see in Lamentations from a first-person perspective, from somebody who lived through the desolation of Judah, the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, and the things, the atrocities that take place when people who've been wearing purple their entire lives are suddenly on the streets trying to find any scrap of food that they're able to get. Mothers with their children. Anyway, all kinds of stuff. It is a horrific view of various things that take place, and it bears the name properly, Lamentations. So lamenting over the things over Jerusalem and the things that took place. All right. That is Jeremiah, and we'll move on from this next week. Any concluding comments or questions? Yes. Was it uncommon for humans to use yokes as tools? Yes. I would say so. I think this is a very, very unique thing. And I say that because a lot of what God says to do is weird. I mean, just outright weird. Isaiah tells them to go around naked for a while. Ezekiel, we haven't gotten there yet. Ezekiel's going to do some really weird things. But even him, go and take your underwear and put it in this rock and just leave it there and then go back and get it later. They are very specifically bizarre to capture attention. And by the way, I think it is important to understand, I use sermons up here, acted sermons. Are these really sermons, though, per se? There's not a congregation of people that this is being delivered to. This isn't to say, for you aspiring preachers, hey, this is what you need to do, is these bizarre, outlandish types of things to get people's attention so they'll remember it. This is not being put up in that kind of epidictic model. Yeah, someone said model. That's good. It's not being put up as a model for you to follow and say this is what you should be doing in your preaching with your sermons. That would be missing the point. This really is God trying to do what he can to get their attention and say this is really important. So it's a good question. All right, let's go ahead and let's close up then. There aren't any. Are there any further? Okay, there aren't any further announcements from anything from this morning. So let's go ahead and close up then with a prayer together. If you'll bow with me. Our Father in heaven, we humble ourselves before you, thanking you for every incredible blessing that we have that comes through your Son. We thank you for your word, and we thank you that you have given these men, these prophets of old, that they have done what they have done, lived as they lived, that they have written these things for our benefit, that we can understand more about you, about your will, about your sovereignty, and to know how you would want us to live our own lives to the praise of your glory. Help us to be those who live to serve you, to accept whatever we have to accept in our lives that comes, and just to know that there is a greater hope of grace that comes through your Son. We thank you for Jesus. We thank you for that hope that we have. And it's through Jesus we pray.